Well, hello, everyone. And
Hello.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
You are welcome.
Oh, that's awesome. For our next episode of Mixed Messages
What? There's another one?
with who?
Jeff Bogue.
Jeff Bogue. And my name is Joe Caruso, and I'll be your host as we dig into today's topic. Well, from news sources to comedians, from friends to advertisements, it seems everyone has an idea of how we should think and live and make decisions. And when everyone disagrees, how do we cut through the noise? How do we sift through all that information overload and choose what governs our lives?
So difficult to do.
Well, we've been processing these things, and our leadership has been praying for all of us, so we want to offer a resource to navigate some of the day's most pressing topics and questions. Jeff, are you here?
I am.
Hey,
Thanks for
Jeff.
acknowledging me, Joe.
Oh, it's so good to
Sometimes
see you
I
and
feel
hear you.
attention starved.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, absolutely, says the guy whose name's in the title of the podcast. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, Jeff, we have a fun question today.
All right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about marriage, and I like to always give these a little bit of prefaces. If you're listening to this and you're not married, keep listening, because this applies to all of your relationships as it navigates your parents, your kids, your friends, and how they would navigate through these things. So don't just check out. I did that a little bit too much when I was younger, and I wish I would have paid more
I
attention.
know. It would have helped.
So anyway, here's our submitted question today. It's kind of a short and sweet one, but it's a deep one.
All right. I'm in.
What if you married the wrong person? And you could expand that a little bit, or if you're a parent of adults, what if your kid marries the quote unquote wrong person? Or maybe your parents getting remarried and it's the wrong person. Like, what do you do when you really feel like, I'm in this and I don't think it's the right person?
Yeah. Well, if you married them, they're the right person.
Okay. Well, walk us through that.
So the premise of the question, and I think I understand where they're going, but I want to be careful with the premise of the question, because the premise of the question is, how do I get out of a bad marriage?
I think you might be right.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at them saying, you don't, unless there are really, really extraordinary circumstances. So you not meshing with the personality, them changing, like that is all the process of marriage, and the Bible would have very clear direction for that. Like if you are married to an unbeliever, you look at 1 Peter chapter 4 a lot, and what God says there to, he's directing it toward women, but actually also applies to men.
Absolutely. Yep.
And there's very clear instructions in the Bible that if you become a believer and your spouse isn't, you should not leave them. You should try to help them know who Christ is. So I'm always careful with this, because in our culture, we throw marriage away. We think of marriage as like longer term dating relationships.
Yeah. Yep.
And we miss the sanctity of it, and we miss the mirroring of Christ that's supposed to be coming through it. So I think that's a really, really important thing. So if you're sitting there and saying, I think I married the wrong person, I would say, well, let's try to figure out how to make that the right person then, and how do you change, and how do they change, and how do we kind of tackle the struggles of your marriage. Now, I want to say this, because I think it's important. I think there are exceptions. So I think if you are in a physically abusive marriage, a truly emotionally abusive marriage, I think we have to be careful with that term right now, because it's thrown around for whoever makes me unhappy.
Yeah.
But there are truly emotionally abusive marriages, or a marriage that is sexually impure. So a person is abusive sexually, or they're abusive by many adulterous affairs. That is a completely different conversation, where the Scripture. I would also add into that an abandoned or a marriage, where a person's like, yeah, I've been married for 5 years and we don't live together. And to me, those are very individual. They're very difficult. They're very deliberate. I have looked at people and said, I do believe biblically and spiritually you have the right to divorce someone. I've even looked at very few people in my life and said, I think it would be best if you did divorce a person. That is probably a 3-year minimum conversation.
Yeah.
And of the thousands of people that I've talked to about their marriages, I may have said those things 5 or 6 times. It's a very rare, desperate, frustrating situation where one spouse has abandoned the marriage covenant and all the rest. So, or it's a dangerous situation. But generally, when people say, I think I married the wrong person, I'm like, well, I don't think you did. I think you need to be committed to your holiness, and they do too. And that is a very difficult process sometimes to go through, because God is refining you in that process, and He's helping you in that process. It's just not a pleasant process to go through.
Yeah, like what does the wrong person even mean if marriage is about the white picket fence and going on vacations and, enjoying bowls of ice cream together at the end of the evening? I mean, your definition of marriage is already skewed. I mean, those can be perks, but if those 3 things aren't working out in your marriage, there's no reason to abandon it. Like, what is that definition of marriage that might help someone rethink why this quote unquote isn't working?
Yeah, and that's what I want to be careful of. I don't want to be flippant or ignore like someone's pain.
Absolutely.
But that's what I was saying. Like in my definition, unless we're talking about habitual adultery, habitual abuse, habitual neglect, and willful, and all those kind of things, then we're not talking about a right or wrong person. We're talking about a immature person, or maybe an unexpected thing that happened in the relationship, and it's a very, very different conversation. And the reason that I am so painfully deliberate about that is because of how we view marriage in our culture. We're quick to throw it away because most people believe that their spouse's job is to make them happy. And so when they say I married the wrong person, what they do is what they're saying is I lost the euphoria. We fell out of love. That just means I lost the euphoria. Or they're not making me happy in a way that I said they should make them happy. I believe they should make me happy. And I believe that when you get into that definition of marriage, you're automatically doomed to failure, and that would automatically mean that everybody married the wrong person. Because marriage is not about your happiness, it's about your holiness. And my job spiritually in marriage is not to make Heidi happy, it's to make her holy. Now, most of our relationship is happy, right? We get along well, etc., but not all the time. And we don't view everything the same way, and she's a different individual than I am.
Absolutely.
And so based on the criteria of our culture over almost 29 years of marriage, I've had hundreds of opportunities to look and say she's the wrong person. She's had thousands, to look at me that way. And I'm like, because that's you're not making me happy. That person over there looks more interesting to me. I'm out. Or this is hard. I'm out. Or you're not the parent I wanted you to be. I'm out. And I'm like, that's not the idea. So I think we think of marriage. You think about a lump of pottery on a wheel spinning. You ever see somebody like make a vase or get that image in your mind? And what happens is they'll make that vase, they'll get a certain point, and they'll make a mistake, and it'll collapse in on itself.
Yep.
Our view of marriage is we're making that vase. If we make a mistake, it collapses in on itself, we throw it away. Jesus' view of marriage is, no, you reform that lump of clay.
Yep.
And you make something different. It's beautiful, but it's different. But you don't throw the clay away. You ask yourself, what mistake did I make? Does it need more water? Blah, 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 right? And so marriage is a constant reforming of your life and their life. I think the only time you get into the conversation of did I marry the wrong person or not is when one of those parties says, I will not be reformed.
Yeah.
And then the church has no authority, you have no authority. Is someone expected to live in that pain and neglect? That's a very, very individualized and very difficult conversation.
It's very difficult. And I think that you illustrated this, but I'll kind of repeat it again. If you think that that's you, then you need to start having the series of long conversations with someone,
That's
a
right.
spiritual leader, and begin the process of prayer and discovery. What path are you on? Is it a hard reforming of the clay, or is it something where you are in that small minutia where
Yeah.
that is the right next step? Now let's shift the gears, but similar question. You find yourself watching a close family member get married. And so, maybe you've lost a parent and they're remarrying, or maybe there was a divorce already and they're remarrying, or the flip side, you're a little bit older in life and you got kids that are getting married and you're looking at who they've chosen. And you're like, I would have warned you, maybe I have warned you that I really don't think you should marry this person, but they continue to go along with that. How do you interact with that new mom, that new dad, or your new son or daughter-in-law?
First of all, if you have those fears, you had them before the wedding. So if you are a friend or a parent or sibling or whoever, if you really fear that they're marrying the same person, you need to communicate those fears as early in the relationship as possible. And in love, and you need to communicate what you need to say, and then you need to listen to what's being said, because you may not know the person.
Absolutely.
Right? So your fears may be unfair. But if you really have that fear, you need to talk to that individual and say, hey, I'm worried about this or think about this. Now, once they are married, you need to try to help them win at marriage.
Yep.
And your agreement about their critiques or your critiquing does nothing to enhance that marriage. I'll be honest with you, that is hands down one of my greatest pet peeves. Is men complaining about their wives and wives gossiping about their husbands. It is not beneficial. It is not encouraging, and it does nothing to enhance who that couple needs to be before the Lord. And I actually think it's one of the most selfish things that we can do. Now, that's different than seeking wise counsel.
Yes.
I'm talking about griping and complaining. I'm talking about belittling men, belittling women. That's absolutely ungodly. It's a pet peeve of mine, you could probably tell, and it does nothing to help out. So once they're married, as you are talking to that person, you need to edify, you need to bring truth, you need to bring encouragement, you need to pray. If we're not in this they're in danger category, right? There's a clear line that I think I've made my point, but like if they're not over there, then you need to be doing your best to help them be the best that they can be.
Yeah, that's really helpful. You don't want to cut off the opportunity to have relationship by your strong digging your heels in viewpoint.
Yeah.
So how do we you ever have one of those moments where you had a very clear formed question in your brain, and then the moment you were going to go say it, it disappeared?
Never on a podcast, Joe.
Never on a. I don't know if I've ever had it on a podcast either, to be honest. But I might have just had my first. So good point. And I really like what you just said. So honestly, I think this might be one of our shorter episodes, but it's one of those deals where it kind of is that clear. There's a lot of hard work ahead of you.
Yep.
That part it's not that short and sweet. But the answer, the decision to kind of put your face like flint, as I said about Jesus, when he decided to do the hard thing and go to the cross, is like, this is the right path.
Yeah.
So let's figure it out together.
And the key to this is Ephesians chapter 4 and 5. It's submit to one another out of mutual respect, and you do that as unto the Lord. So submission is giving the best of yourself to the other person. So when you're feeling grumpy about your spouse, write down the 10 things you love about them that day, and then tell them that.
Yeah.
It'll change the whole mood.
Yes, it will.
When you feel like they're selfish, serve them. Give the best of yourself to them, and it changes the whole dynamic. Most marriage problems can be journeyed through with godliness. There's mental illness, there's childhood wounds, there's caveats. but most marriage problems can be journeyed through with godliness. So be godly
Yep.
in this process.
You mentioned this mirrors our relationship with God, and one of God's most pronounced characteristics is that he's long-suffering. Because you serve them doesn't mean that afternoon, I'm like, you know what? I have been selfish.
That's right.
And just because you build them up and encourage them doesn't mean that they're going to reciprocate that right away. But God still gave his best to us well before we ever decided to reciprocate.
Absolutely.
And that's where marriage can be an awesome reflection of that. Well, I hope that this is encouraging to you no matter where you find yourself in the marriage conversation. But there are so many resources and so many things that we can continue to dive into to help you along that journey wherever you may find yourself. And we want to serve you, help you, and even walk you through any amount of pain that you've been in. If you have any other questions that you'd like to submit, you can do that at bath.gracechurches.org/mixed messages. If we can help you take any of those unique next steps, of course, we want to do that. Reach out. We'd love to help you. And if you like and want to hear more of what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe, follow, rate, and review our podcast. If you're looking for a church home on the weekend, you can always join us in person or online if you're out of the area. And we're just so glad that you would be jumping in with us today as we continue to seek God's voice through all of the mixed messages around us. See you next time.